People often imagine explorers as fearless heroes with perfect plans, yet the strange truth is that many of the bravest travelers stepped forward while knowing almost nothing certain about where they would end up. What kind of courage sends someone everywhere without clear maps, reliable clocks, or promises of return, while comfort and safety remain patiently behind, waiting for those who choose not to go? This story begins with a puzzle because the world felt both enormous and unfinished, as if land and sea were daring humans to test how far curiosity could stretch. The first explorers did not rush out of boredom, but moved carefully from familiar paths, balancing hunger for discovery against the constant risk of getting lost forever. Here, power met limitation early, since kingdoms dreamed of control while ships creaked, supplies spoiled, and navigation depended on stars that refused to stay still. As we travel together into these early journeys, notice how bravery often grew from uncertainty rather than confidence, because certainty rarely existed long enough to be trusted. Long before famous names were recorded, small groups pushed outward, following coastlines, rivers, and winds that seemed to whisper suggestions without explanations. Daily life shaped these travelers, since explorers were once farmers, fishers, traders, or messengers who carried ordinary habits into extraordinary distances. Food mattered as much as courage, because decisions depended on what could be carried, grown, traded, or found along unfamiliar routes. Simple tools guided movement, including ropes, sails, stars, landmarks, and memory, all stitched together into fragile systems of survival. The storyteller walks beside these early travelers, noticing how each step away from home increased dependence on cooperation rather than individual strength. Exploration quickly became social, since no one crossed far alone, and shared trust held groups together when fear tested their patience. Even before empires expanded, routes formed quietly, shaped by repeated footsteps rather than royal commands. Some journeys followed water because rivers and seas offered guidance, even while hiding dangers beneath calm surfaces. Others crossed land where paths vanished, forcing travelers to negotiate with landscapes that cared nothing about human plans. Weather acted as an unpredictable partner, sometimes generous, sometimes harsh, never fully obedient to experience. As movement increased, stories traveled faster than people, carrying warnings, hopes, and exaggerated promises from distant places. These stories shaped decisions, since imagination often filled gaps left by incomplete knowledge. Early explorers learned that bravery did not eliminate fear, but rearranged it into manageable pieces. Systems slowly emerged, including trading posts, resting places, and shared signals, turning wandering into something repeatable. The conflict between security and decision appeared clearly because staying safe meant staying small, while choosing to go meant accepting permanent risk. Communities argued about these choices, weighing loss against opportunity with no clear answers. Leadership mattered less than adaptability, since plans collapsed easily when reality refused cooperation. Navigation improved gradually, yet mistakes remained common enough to teach humility. Explorers observed patterns, watching stars, tides, animals, and plants, building quiet knowledge without realizing they were making science. Cultural encounters shaped routes, as meeting others required listening, trading, and sometimes retreating. Misunderstandings occurred frequently, though curiosity often prevented immediate conflict. The storyteller notices how exploration depended on respect as much as bravery because survival required learning quickly from strangers. Movement changed how people imagined the world, stretching mental borders faster than political ones. Each successful return made the world feel slightly smaller and more connected. Yet each departure reopened uncertainty, reminding everyone that knowledge stayed incomplete. Exploration influenced daily life at home, since goods, ideas, and stories altered familiar routines. Clothing, food, tools, and languages absorbed traces of distant places. Children grew up hearing of lands beyond horizons, shaping future curiosity. The system of exploration slowly fed itself, as success inspired repetition. However, failure never disappeared, quietly waiting to humble confident travelers. Routes depended on timing, since seasons controlled safety as much as skill. Explorers learned patience, waiting months or years before attempting new paths. The rhythm of travel followed natural cycles rather than human schedules. Maps, where they existed, reflected hope more than accuracy. Blank spaces invited ambition, while warnings crowded familiar regions. The storyteller gently points out that ignorance did not stop movement, instead, it framed expectations. Bravery became a shared language, understood through action rather than words. Exploration built invisible networks long before visible borders formed. Trust moved along these networks, tested repeatedly and reinforced slowly. No journey stayed isolated, since every path influenced another decision somewhere else. As systems expanded, exploration shifted from personal daring toward collective momentum. Still, individuals carried responsibility, making choices that shaped outcomes for many. The tension between freedom and obligation grew stronger with each successful expedition. Knowledge accumulated unevenly, leaving surprises even along familiar routes. The world resisted full understanding, ensuring exploration remained necessary. Each journey adjusted expectations rather than completing them. Curiosity settled into habits, becoming part of how societies functioned. Movement reshaped identity since travelers' return changed, even when places felt unchanged. The storyteller pauses here, sensing that these foundations quietly prepared something larger, as if the world itself was waiting to be crossed again. With those foundations laid quietly beneath their feet, explorers began pushing farther, discovering that distance magnified every weakness while also sharpening cooperation. Because mistakes that felt small at home became dangerous lessons once support disappeared beyond the horizon. Journeys grew longer, not because confidence increased, but because curiosity learned how to borrow discipline, turning fragile routines into traveling systems that carried order across chaos. Supplies were calculated more carefully, though uncertainty still ruled. Since winds shifted, currents changed, and land often refused to appear where memory promised it would. The storyteller walks among crowded decks and dusty caravans, noticing how silence sometimes guided decisions better than shouting, especially when exhaustion blurred judgment. Leadership evolved into negotiation since survival depended on listening to weather, terrain, and companions rather than commanding them. Fear remained present, although it learned to hide behind jokes, rituals, and repeated tasks that made danger feel briefly familiar. Explorers recorded what they saw, even when words struggled to describe landscapes that defied imagination. Logs, sketches, and symbols became companions, preserving moments for people who might never travel so far themselves. Systems expanded again as ports, camps, and waypoints connected distant routes into loose networks. Trade followed exploration closely because movement created desire, and desire reshaped priorities. Objects gained stories since goods carried traces of places they had touched. The conflict between control and consequence sharpened as rulers realized expansion required trust in people they could not see. Orders left capitals confidently, though outcomes returned altered by reality. Explorers learned they represented more than themselves, carrying expectations that weighed heavier than packs. Cultural exchange deepened, sometimes gently, sometimes painfully, shaping both visitors and hosts. Language bent and blended, creating understanding where none existed before. Mistakes still happened often, proving that experience reduced danger but never erased it. Navigation improved through shared knowledge, yet nature continued testing limits with storms, ice, heat, and emptiness. The storyteller observes how maps slowly filled, though certainty never fully replaced curiosity. Blank spaces moved rather than vanished, shifting farther away with each discovery. Daily routines hardened into traditions, helping travelers maintain identity while away from home. Songs, mills, and shared stories anchored groups emotionally during long passages. Exploration affected families left behind, who measured time differently while waiting for returns that were never guaranteed. Letters traveled slowly, carrying hope delayed by months or years. Children learned patience early, growing up between departures and arrivals. The system of exploration demanded sacrifice, often invisible to those enjoying its rewards. Success increased ambition, tempting travelers toward riskier paths. Failure quietly reminded everyone that the world did not promise fairness. The storyteller notices how resilience replaced fear as the defining trait of experienced explorers. Journeys became mirrors, reflecting inner limits as clearly as geographic ones. Some returned home unable to settle, carrying restlessness shaped by distance. Others stayed away forever, absorbed into new lands and stories. Exploration blurred the idea of home, stretching it across roots and memories. Power shifted gradually as knowledge became currency more valuable than gold. States and communities argued over who owned discoveries and their consequences. Control tightened in some places while freedom expanded elsewhere. The tension between structure and adaptability continued shaping decisions. Explorers balanced obedience with improvisation, knowing both were necessary. Technology improved, yet reliance on judgment remained constant. The storyteller listens as older travelers advise younger ones, offering warnings wrapped in encouragement. Experience became tradition, passing lessons forward through voice rather than writing. Exploration no longer felt like wandering, but like participation in something larger. Still, each journey felt personal, measured in blisters, hunger, and doubt. The world revealed patterns, though never complete answers. Connections multiplied, tying distant places together through shared movement. Exploration reshaped history quietly, long before names filled textbooks. Roots turned into expectations, and expectations shaped futures. The storyteller senses momentum building, as if these paths were preparing something bigger than individual journeys. What began as scattered curiosity had grown into a force changing how humans understood space and possibility. Yet uncertainty remained essential, ensuring exploration never became routine. The balance between knowing and wondering stayed delicate. Every arrival suggested another departure waiting. The world continued inviting movement, even while resisting complete understanding. Explorers stood at edges often, not because they enjoyed danger, but because edges offered perspective. From those edges, choices carried weight beyond imagination. The storyteller slows the pace here, feeling the tension between accomplishment and unanswered questions stretching forward, quietly preparing the next chapter of this long journey.